As a child, I thought of these first few days of the creation story as sort of the boring bits before God gets down to the really serious and interesting stuff like creating human beings, and then the rest of the story unfolds where Adam and Eve are tempted by the serpent, and etc., etc. But if you actually pause and you look and listen to the images that are presented here, I think you'll get a much deeper sense of what's really going on, that God's not just sort of checking off a list and saying, oh, let's get a little light, let's get a little land, a little sea, and maybe some vegetation. I want you to imagine that you are in a completely dark room, that the earth is a locked room, away from sound, away from light, or imagine that you're in sort of the deepest part of the ocean where it's so vast and so black that you can't see anything. The phrase that's used to describe the earth prior to creation is, in the Hebrew, tohu vavohu, here translated as wild and waste, but it is also translated as formless and empty, or formless and void. The word tohu is used in the Bible elsewhere to refer to scenarios where a people has turned away from God and subsequently their land has become a devastation, a wasteland. In other places, it's used to describe the futility of idols, or idol worship, or idol making. It can also be translated or glossed as purposelessness, nothingness, chaos, or vapor, just to name a few. And the text says that there was darkness over the face of the Tehom, which is often translated deep, but here it's translated as ocean, because it's trying to convey this idea of dark primordial waters. The Septuagint, which is a later translation, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, translates this word as abyssos, which can be translated as abyss, or even place of the dead. Now that doesn't mean that that's quite what's going on here in the Hebrew text, but that does give us sort of an idea and sort of broaden the picture of how later interpreters might have thought of this passage. But the Spirit of God is rushing, churning, breathing over the surface of the water, ready to create, to separate, and to fill with light and life. And suddenly a voice says, "Let there be light," and there is light. God sees the light, that it's good, and this is a pattern that's sort of set throughout the text. If you read it again, you'll see there's this pattern of God creates something, he says, "Let there be," and then he sees that it's good, and this is sort of this perpetual way of returning to this idea of creation. And when God says, "Let there be thus and so," he's using a kind of regal language that a king in the ancient Near East might have used, sort of summoning forth various parts of creation, naming them, and as we'll, I think, unpack a little more in the next installment, giving them various tasks or areas over which to rule and giving them purpose. So God sees each part of creation that it's good. And because it comes up so often, it's really important to sort of tease out what this might mean. First of all, it's important because there's this seeing motif in the first 3 chapters of Genesis, was that actually I think is sort of fleshed out throughout Genesis and even beyond, but especially in the first 3 chapters. And as you'll see later on in the series, when Eve is tempted by the serpent to eat the forbidden fruit, the text says that, quote, "The woman saw that the tree was good for eating, that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to contemplate." And so the text uses these ideas of sight and contrasts Eve's vision of the fruit that she's not supposed to eat as an ironic contrast between God's vision of what really is good. But we'll unpack that more a little later. It's really interesting to see how that unfolds. And in terms of good, what does God see that's good? What does good mean in this context? I think oftentimes we think of good as being just in a moral sense. And that word may have those connotations here, but it can also mean simply pleasant, advantageous, profitable, excellent of its kind, or similar adjectives. And when we see at the beginning God summoning light and separating it from the darkness, and giving them the respective names, day and night. And he creates an expanse or a dome. It's called a dome in this text, although it's also called a firmament in other texts, depending on your translation, in the waters, and causes land to appear in the waters, and then summons the earth to produce vegetation. What's being shown on your screen here is one artist's rendering of how the earth was conceived in the ancient Near East, because they don't have the same sort of view of the earth that we have, because they didn't have the same sort of modern scientific techniques or knowledge that we have. So as you can see, the waters below are the sea, and from that you have dry land sort of emerging from it, and above it is a sort of dome of the heavens, or simply sky. Heavens and sky, it's just the same word, shamayim. And there is also water above the dome, or the firmament. And above that is the highest heaven where God lives. But we'll dig more into that later. So we've gotten to the end of day 3. The next part of the series, we'll be looking at the next few days of creation. But if you want to find out what's next, you'll just have to wait till the next installment or read Genesis for yourself. Thank you.